Pelosi versus Mnuchin. We've often blamed Pelosi for the problems we're in, but is it also Mnuchin? And why did the president elect someone to negotiate for your second stimulus who's not part of the legislative body that is actually embodied to do the stimulus? The question as we sit here today is what happened with Pelosi? What happened with Mnuchin? And will there ever be a Pelosi versus Mnuchin 10 days from now? The renewed focus of this channel is that we really don't care. We really don't care. Ultimately, we're going to get the stimulus. We don't care about Pelosi. We don't care about Mnuchin because we're going to get the stimulus we need. It's going to be dependent upon one factor and one factor only. What happens the day after election night? And this is Pelosi versus Mnuchin. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm here, you're here, and your alpaca's here. I don't know about your llama. But I appreciate all the cats and the dogs. It is Catterday. I appreciate all the cat videos you've been sending me and cat pictures. Just really charming. I wonder what Morris the cat would say about Pelosi versus Mnuchin. I know Grumpy Cat would not be happy. But I appreciate you for tuning in. Go to the first channel, subscribe. Subscribe because we can get through this together as a community. We're going to get to the finish line. Also, like this video. In this video, I'll be going over what went wrong with Mnuchin, but what's going right in the future. I'm going to not focus on negativity. I'm going to focus on positivity because ultimately you've been strung along a lot in the last 7 days. I see a lot of you beat up badly. And so what I'm going to focus on is where we're getting from point A to point B, how we're getting to the finish line. What went wrong with Mnuchin, and I'm going to cover in this video, is that he didn't go higher in the number early on. He didn't get GOP support to go to the further point. He never planned for Trump implosion or Trump loss in the campaign, and that he never really got any partisan alignment. But the renewed focus of this channel this afternoon is to get your stimulus, is not to really focus on Pelosi versus Mnuchin, but to focus on what happens after Pelosi versus Mnuchin. It's 10 days away from now, 10 days away from election night, and after that night, there may no longer be a Pelosi versus Mnuchin. All right, let's get to the breaking news. The breaking news as we sit here today is that there may not be a Pelosi versus Mnuchin 10 days from now. The reason why is it's all dependent on what happens on election night. If you tuned into 28 at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time, I went over the permutations about what happens with a contested election. In the video before this, McConnell versus Trump, I went over the permutations of what happens if the Senate goes Republican or the Senate goes Democratic. So ultimately, Pelosi versus Mnuchin is really more dependent upon whether the Senate goes Democratic or not, and whether or not the election's contested or not. Let me explain why in the context of Pelosi versus Mnuchin. First, if there's a contested election, the president remains in the Oval Office, and Mnuchin remains his cabinet member for Secretary of Treasury. And so Mnuchin is still there, even though Trump may have lost, he's contesting the election. So would Mnuchin actually still work with Pelosi? Perhaps, but the point is, no one would really think that any agreement between Pelosi and Mnuchin is much of anything, because the president arguably can't sign any deal because he's a contested president. It's very similar to the Gore Bush battle on the hanging Chad, more than several decades ago, in which we didn't know who the president was, and you didn't want to see the president signing a bill into law because they may not be the president. So that is the first thing to understand. There is no Pelosi versus Mnuchin for purposes of lawmaking if there's a contested election, because the contested president can't really sign anything into law. Next, if the Senate goes Democratic on election night, is there Pelosi versus Mnuchin the next day? There can be, but I just don't think it's going to happen. Ultimately, if you see Mitch McConnell's group not retaining ownership of the Senate, and Mnuchin still in office until, let's say a few months, would they be able to push things through what's called a lame duck Senate No, I don't see that happening either. So then what? Well, of all the scenarios that I see in place, the only one left is that the Senate remains in control by the Republicans, the House remains in control by the Democrats, and the Trump administration loses the election and that Biden's the new president. Would Mnuchin do a deal with Nancy Pelosi and push it into the House, into the Senate, under McConnell and the Republican leadership before Biden comes in for Biden? I don't see that either. I don't see that either, because ultimately what's going on is that you're asking for the president sitting in office now to help the next president in office. As you see here today, a lot of these problems don't lead to a path of resistance, but more about that in a second. I'll explain to you where is the path to get you stimulus. The problem with Mnuchin that we've had during this entire negotiations period is that Mnuchin did not go higher early enough. He stayed at a lower number, and that lower number ultimately was to blame. The lower number may have been staying local. Mnuchin's at $300 billion now, was initially not even at $100 billion, initially wasn't at anything, and that wasn't a solution. His claim at the time, when appearing on Squawk Box nearly 3 months ago in the thick of summer, said, I'm not going to give any money for staying local because she wants to use it for things that are non-COVID-19 related. To which he was asked by the CNBC anchors, why don't you put guardrails on it? Why don't you just say, hey, put protections on what the state and local money is for? And ultimately, he didn't have an answer for that. Now he's doing exactly that. Next, he didn't get GOP support early in the plan. The problem with the lack of GOP support has been all across the board. As we sit here and we wonder about your stimulus check, the GOP has never put on a bill that had stimulus checks in it, ever. Last week's stimulus bill from Mitch McConnell had no stimulus checks in it. The prior stimulus bill from Mitch McConnell had no stimulus checks in it. And the one before that, the one for the HEALS Act, had no stimulus checks in that. So with Steve Mnuchin drafting stimulus checks, would he have ever had approval from the GOP? We don't know. Next, Mnuchin never got partisan alignment. He never got his party aligned at all. What's important to understand is that the president chose a cabinet member who's a cabinet member, not a former senator, not a former House member, who's a man from Wall Street to negotiation for deals. And as you saw in early mornings at LALATE, that has caused a problem. Categorically, a lot of GOP leaders have said in the last 7 days that they don't even know what the current offer is from Steve Mnuchin, that they're looking through news reports from broadcast news on this channel to find out what is the current offer. Steve Mnuchin's not debriefing us. We have no idea what he's at. We have no idea what the numbers are, and we have no idea what the language is. Do you think that works? No, it doesn't work, because ultimately it's those people who are responsible for passing laws, not Steve Mnuchin. So he's going in negotiating for them, not telling him what he's doing for them, and then going to turn around back to them and say, hey, do this deal. Well, you haven't told me what you've been doing for 2 weeks. What do you mean go do the deal? I'm not going to co-sign a deal. You haven't even called me up. I've been asking what the deal is. Finally, the president did not prepare Mnuchin for a potential presidential loss. Coming into the last few months of this stimulus battle, the presidential race was all over the place. The president clearly thought at that time he was going to win the election. But as the poll numbers started to implode, as the president started to fall further and further back, 3 points and 5 points and 8 points, Nancy Pelosi took that for her advantage. With understanding that the president was not doing well in the polls, Nancy Pelosi held her feet deeper in the sand and said, I'm not moving. I'm not moving. You can start coming up and throwing lots of numbers at me. And that's exactly what she did. She saw the president's poll numbers drop, and as the president's poll numbers dropped, Nancy Pelosi became more resilient to not move on her numbers. Today, she remains exactly at her 2.2 number from July. Now, in July, we knew she was going to do that. In July, we knew she was not going to negotiate and not move, but we didn't know how that would work for her, because at the time, the race was very close between Biden and Trump. Now that the race is going against Trump and not going beneficial, Pelosi is using that as a way to demand the president to come up. And he is coming up. And by coming up, she's using that against him to ultimately look like he's giving her a lot, but in the same case, not coming to an agreement. As you sit here today, where is Pelosi versus MNUCHIN before the election night? 1, there is no agreement. 2, there is no drafting the agreement. 3, Nancy Pelosi is not giving clarity as to how long it would take to draft the agreement. The last 2 bills that she's introduced have been 3,000 pages long. 4, even if it was approved as an agreement, would it be voted upon? There are some reports that say Nancy Pelosi wants a fast vote in the House. Of course she does. And that by doing that vote, she'll say, hey, I have the House agreeing upon a bill that Steve and I agreed to. Okay, let's send it to the Senate. Oh, guess what? The Senate's closed. Yeah. There's reports that the Senate will go on recess this coming Monday or the Monday after. Enough time to block any efforts by Nancy Pelosi and Steve MNUCHIN. And so if the Senate does go on recess right after a Barrett nomination, then you're not going to see anything before election night. And then we go to the permutation about after election night. Let me get to some incredible comments and questions from yesterday's video. Pamela, they're showing their true colors. It's all an act. They don't give a damn. We've been played around for too long. Alice, I see the future of signs and people yelling, where's our money? Lionel, I've come to the conclusion these politicians are the devil's advocate. PJ Blues, and they won't agree. They don't want Trump to benefit from the win in November. Frank L., none of them have ever done a day's work in their entire miserable lives except to count our money. That doesn't belong to us. Keep up the pressure on all of them. Go Purple Power. I love that, Frank L. 4 emojis. Fun times. I pray to the Lord the United States doesn't end up a tent city because Washington, D.C. doesn't care. Glad to hear you, LALATE. Hello, Purple Power. Not trying to be a downer. Truly trying to be positive. Amen. Eric Wise, what a bunch of losers in charge of our money. Yes, our money. Where do you think it comes from? Mitch and Nancy, biggest horror stories just in time for Halloween. Hugh Smith, McConnell really didn't mean to when he said, look for yourself, Republicans. He didn't realize that the whole of Congress and the president were doing the same thing, looking for themselves. No, not one. No one of them were going to help the American people. L8, why are you not running for president? Just write me in. Write me in. Deadly Viper. Pelosi has purposely allowed this to drag out as long as possible because she doesn't want Trump to get credit before the election. She already has. She should be brought up on treason. Deborah, liars are so sad. They need to get back their money that they received. Or Rebecca, it's pretty obvious they're wasting air. Give the job to someone who can get things done. Don't pay them until they do. Randy Pierce. Share the Purple Power of all the people in your contact list on Facebook. Amen, Randy Pierce. And on other social media platforms, share Purple Power. We all have to speak up to get what we're owed. Tonya Hunt. Sounds like a bunch of liars. They all need to be fired. Barbara Perez. I can't take this anymore. This government has gone to hell with hypocrites. Erica Aguilar. Sounds like Nancy just wants to create more money for staying local by cutting out the American people. Well, she is raising staying local, and she is cutting out the American people. She's crazy. Ronald Johnson. They're traitors. They need life in prison. What do you think? Drop your comments below. I know you have comments. I know it's a renewed day. You know, on days like this where you see the energy ramped up, where you see me more positive, when you see me more energized, where you see me more focused, there's a reason. There's a reason why I do that. The reason is to get you focused on getting your stimulus. I could sit back and say, here's an article from Forbes overnight that says Nancy says something's imminent. And here's an article from CNN that says MNUCHIN says, we're working on some language and the speaker, and we're going to do some homework tomorrow. How does that help you? That doesn't help you. My job is to get you stimulus. My job is not to read you news articles. My job is not just to debrief you on the progress of no progress every single day. My job is to get you stimulus. And ultimately, the important message to get out to these people is that you need stimulus, you're owed stimulus, I am valued, you are valued, hashtag I am valued, hashtag you are valued, hashtag MSC. We demand multiple stimulus checks. We're not going to settle for measly little stimulus checks. And we're not going to stop the message no matter what happens on election night. We do not have a cliff we're falling over on election night. Our message does not change on election night. It does not change before election night. It does not change the day after election night. You're owed these multiple stimulus checks, and you will get a very robust stimulus. The question is when and from whom, and every path along the way I will detail as we get to them. Go to the front channel, subscribe, because we're going to get through this together. We're focused and we're laser focused on getting the relief you need. It's unlike anything else you usually see, because the path here is a little bit murky in the days to come, but we will get through this together. So go to the front channel, subscribe, also hit the alert button on this channel so you can alert when a new video goes live. Also like this video. Coming up next is Evening to LALATE with big updates expected across the board, so stay tuned for that. Starts with the check and then Purple Power 30 minutes thereafter, a 1-hour programming block. As always, stay of LA for more. Stay informed, stay smiling, stay focused, and stay with LALATE all day long.